Let's get back to work. We come back to session 2. We have two speakers. We have two speakers for this session. The first speaker is Sister Aditi Maitreya. She is a sixth generation theosophist. Sixth generation, which means everybody knows Maitreya here, Maitreya's grandfather's grandfather. So it takes you back to HPV's times, and since then, for every generation, there has been a member who has been a member of the TS. So she belongs to the sixth generation. We are also happy to have Dr. Sunita Maitreya here with us. Aditi has held positions in Vasanta Youth Lodge and in the International Order of the Round Table. She is a designer and journalist. She manages the Phoenix Company and has worked as a journalist. She is also a visiting professor at the Asian College of Journalism. She's got a postgraduate diploma in print journalism from the Asian College of Journalism, which means she writes for newspapers, magazines, journals. Her academics are, she completed a bachelor's in visual communication from MOP Vaishnav College for Women. She is a seasoned debater and orator. She has competed and won in district, state and national level competitions. She is a writer and has released a book titled Swift and Her Musings in Life. She is a recipient of the Rashtrapati Puraskar, the highest medal, President's Medal, the highest award in the country, the Girls' Guides and Boy Scouts movement. She has received the 30 Under 30 Swabhiman Award for entrepreneurship. This award is instituted by her alma mater, MOP College. She is also an artist, a musician. She is also a Trinity College certified grade 4 pianist. She has been trained formally in Hindustani music. She has been involved in a number of relief and rehabilitation projects of the Theosophical Order of Service and World Care Way. So you see a multifaceted personality here. I invite Aditi to speak to us on humility paves the way to nobility. Being noble is being perfect? Well, she will answer it. Over to you, Aditi.
Thank you. Good morning to one and all present here today. It gives me great pleasure to be a speaker at the 100th South Indian Conference. My topic for today is Humility Paves the Way to Nobility. Being noble is being perfect? I would like to begin with a poem written by my father, C.V.K. Maitreya, many years ago. Titled Smith and Sarah, the poem is about a village priest named Smith and his wife Sarah. It is a little long, so do bear with me. Hear ye, Here's the story of he and she. Who was he and who was she? Oh, just keep quiet and listen to me. He was Smith, the village priest, and she was Sarah, his wife from the east. Knelt in prayer all day long, listened they to the holy song. But so narrow their good faith, they saw it not on another's face. Help they refused when they were old, and boasted they were good and bold. So proud they were of their goodness, that all around were filled with sadness. Come one day a big flood, full of water and a lot of mud. Came their friends rowing a boat. They proudly said, God will keep us afloat. Rose the flood to the rooftop. Smith and Sarah sat on top of its top. Came their friends flying in a helicopter. The proud couple turned away in laughter. But alas, very soon they were all gone, as the flood took all by the morn. Went they to heaven in anger and pride. Lord, we prayed, you were not at our side. We laughed and said, O foolish friend, God to us when an angel sent. What happened? Oh, what happened to you? You were not when we needed you. The Lord said, O foolish you, sent I the boat and the copter too. Look for me, for I am true, and never say no to your friends so few. At first glance, it is very easy for you and me to laugh at the foolishness of Smith and Sarah. Their pride and arrogance were so apparent that it blinded them. If only they were humble, their fate would have been different. If only humility was there instead of pride, they would have accepted help. As a third person, it comes naturally to us to judge their choices. We are quick to see their pig-headedness. And above all, we believe that had it been us, we would have acted more rationally. But little do we realize that in more ways than one, we are all Smiths and Sarahs in our own lives. There is an element of pride that we all possess, and it manifests itself every day in our routine interactions. If you are wondering why I am talking about pride, it is because one cannot speak about humility without speaking about pride. Humility, in its essence, is the freedom from pride or arrogance or the state of being humble. And humility is one of the many virtues one must inculcate in order to become noble. On the surface, this seems fairly simple, but on closer observation, one understands that indeed it is very difficult. Pride tends to creep into our responses and actions, our words and gestures without us even realizing it. When someone tries to explain a subject that we are already familiar with, we tend to tune them out because we think we know everything about that topic. That is pride. When someone asks us to do something but we feel that we are too superior to do it, that is pride. When we can't stop talking about our own achievements or the good deeds that we have carried out, that is pride. Pride hampers our learning, our relationships, and our growth. But most importantly, pride is a hindrance in our spiritual journey. In the book The Masters and the Path, C.W. Leadbeater writes about how many people used to approach him and Dr. Annie Besant, asking them why the great ones haven't chosen them as pupils despite them being earnest and devoted. To this, Bishop Leadbeater says, and I quote, "There may be many reasons why he does not. Sometimes a person asking that has some prominent fault which is in itself quite a sufficient reason. Not infrequently, I regret to say, It is pride. A person may have so good a conceit of himself that he is not amenable to teaching, although he thinks that he is. Unquote. He goes on to explain that another common hindrance is the readiness to be of practically no use in the work because he cannot get on with other people. His readiness to be offended. And he says, I quote, "Many a good and earnest aspirant is so easily offended as to be of practically no use in the work because he cannot get on with other people. He will have to wait until he has learned to adapt himself and to cooperate with any person whatever. Many people who make the inquiry have failings of this kind, and they do not like it if their fault is pointed out to them. They do not generally believe that they have it and imagine that we are in error, but in rare cases they are willing to profit by the suggestion." Unquote. In this context, he shares an interesting anecdote of a lady who visited him in America, asking him to see her clairvoyantly or occultly or in any other way and tell her why she wasn't moving closer to the masters. Bishop Leadbeater asked her if she was sure she wanted him to do this, and upon confirmation he said, and I quote, "Well, if you really want to know, there is too much ego in your cosmos. You are thinking all about yourself and not enough about the work." Unquote. On hearing this, the lady was terribly offended, and she told Bishop Leadbeater that she didn't think much of his clairvoyant powers. But strangely, after 2 years, she returned to him and accepted that what he said was right and that she was willing to work on herself. Bishop Leadbeater mentions that many people had asked him the same question before, but she was the only one who came back and acknowledged her fault. Humility has become scarce in today's world. We see examples of it every day. And unfortunately, the entrenchment of pride has become so strong that it has created a rather polarized, intolerant, and consequently violent atmosphere in society. Today, pride in your religion, culture, country, and faith is no longer about just a sense of confident, joyful affiliation. It has become a venomous association that has created social divide and disrupted peace. It has become about superiority, aggression, and one-upmanship. And this egoism has manifested itself today in the form of war, hate speech, and crime. Interestingly, there are now psychological experiments being carried out to study humility. An article in the New York Times talks about a series of experiments carried out by Elizabeth Krumrie Mancuso of Pepperdine University, where she had 587 American adults complete questionnaires intended to measure levels of what is called intellectual humility. Intellectual humility, she says, is an awareness of how incomplete and fallible their views on political and social issues were. Now, those who scored highly on humility also scored lower on measures of political and ideological polarization, whether conservative or liberal. Other research found that people who score high on humility are less aggressive and less judgmental toward members of other religious groups than are less humble people, even and especially after being challenged about their own religious views. Dr. Mancuso says, and I quote, "These kinds of findings may account for the fact that people high in intellectual humility are not easily manipulated with regard to their views." Unquote. The findings, she added, may also help us understand how humility can be associated with holding convictions. As a student of theosophy, one realizes how frequently the great ones warn us against having pride, as it is extremely detrimental to our progress on this path. The words of one of the great ones beautifully and gently elucidate the implications of pride. He says, and I quote, "But take rest, lest in the heart of this great flower of love there should be a tiny touch of pride, which might spread as does an almost invisible spot of decay, until it has tainted and corrupted the whole blossom." Remember what our great brother has written, "Be humble if thou wouldst attain to wisdom. Be humbler still when wisdom thou hast mastered." Cultivate the modest, fragrant plant humility until its sweet aroma permeates every fiber of your being. Unquote. One would think that one would be free from such predispositions once they reach a certain stage on this path. It is indeed true that it should be impossible for a man who has come so far to fall back. But sadly, it is more common than we would like to believe. It is a lot like a game of snakes and ladders. Pride is like one of those snakes that pull you down on this journey, and we must be mindful to avoid it. In fact, in Christianity, pride is referred to as the first of the 7 cardinal sins. In the book The Masters and the Path, Bishop Leadbeater draws our attention to how the period after reaching a certain stage on the path to perfection is particularly dangerous. He says, and I quote, "It is at this stage especially that if there is any weakness in a candidate's character, it will show itself. It should be impossible for a man who has raised himself to this height to fall back, but unfortunately, experience has shown us that even this does sometimes happen. In nearly all cases, the danger comes through pride. If there is the least tinge of pride in the man's nature, he is in serious risk of a fall. What we talk about down here as intellect is the merest reflection of the real thing. Yet, some of us are proud of that intellect and that insight." Unquote. Bishop Leadbeater stresses that if there is pride, then the individual will have a terribly hard time getting back to that higher stage again. The only way to successfully pass through different stages on this path is through unceasing and increasing vigilance by making a constant endeavor to kill out every trace of pride, selfishness and prejudice. In theosophy, for an arhat to carry out his mighty work, it is crucial for him to climb to the topmost heights of that utmost of human planes of existence, and for that he must cast off the last of the 10 fetters, one of which is mano or pride. It is said that, and I quote, "Once the 8th fetter mana is filed away, he forgets the greatness of his own achievements and pride becomes impossible for him, since now he stands always in the light and measures himself against no lower thing." Unquote. A crucial thing to note here is how pride is mentioned as one of the 10 fetters that need to be cast off. This means that a candidate on the path must let go of other fetters too, like Ruparaga, or the desire for beauty of form or for physical existence in a form, even including that in the heaven world. Aruparaga, the desire for formless life. Uddhacha, agitation or irritability. And avidya, or ignorance, to name a few. And here lies the answer to my topic today. Humility undeniably paves the way to nobility, but it isn't the only virtue that makes you noble. Nobility is an amalgamation of many qualities like kindness, selflessness, compassion, helpfulness and righteousness. That being said, being noble is only a step on this path to perfection. And it would be incorrect to say that being noble is the same as being perfect. Perfection isn't something that you and I can define. It is beyond our comprehension because we haven't experienced it. As seekers, all we can do is understand how we must conduct ourselves to walk on the path to perfection. The requirements for the path have found mention in many spiritual and theosophical teachings. In Buddhism, they refer to the Noble Eightfold Path, which is right belief, right thought, right speech, right action, right means of livelihood, right energy, right contemplation, and right realization. The At the Feet of the Master by Alcione talks about the 4 qualifications for this pathway, which are discrimination, desirelessness, good conduct, and love. But what is important to remember here is that without humility, one cannot tread this path. Having pride in our right actions, having pride in being desireless, makes the entire effort futile. And that is why humility plays a big role. While we must all strive to become humbler, it is quite difficult. Like Dr. Darrell Van Tongeren, a psychologist at Hope College in Michigan says, and I quote, "One of the thorny issues is that the people who are the most open and willing to cultivate humility might be the ones who need it the least, and vice versa. Those most in need could be the most resistant." Unquote. We must also be mindful not to cross over to the other side of humility, which is marked by self-doubt and low self-confidence and low self-respect. Here, I would like to suggest a few simple things that we can do to inculcate humility and be more mindful in our thoughts, words, and actions. First, adopt an attitude of gratitude. I recently read somewhere that each of us is currently living the prayer we once asked for, and therefore there is always something to be grateful for. Maintaining a gratitude diary which you fill in every day or even once a week can be helpful as it makes us aware. You can also say a prayer at night before going to sleep. Second, be a part of organizations that foster brotherhood, open-mindedness, and harmony. Organizations like the Theosophical Society, the Order of the Round Table, and the Girl Guide and Boy Scouts movement broaden your perspectives as you grow by not just exposing you to diverse viewpoints but also fostering an atmosphere of acceptance and mutual respect. Third, journaling and studying. A friend of mine recently told me about a practice that he follows, and I found it rather interesting. We have all heard about journaling and maintaining a diary to pen our thoughts. One of the things he did was write about all the feedback and criticism that he received from his team members at work in his journal, and over time, when he looked back, he found a pattern in his behavior that elucidated that kind of feedback. Recognizing that pattern helped him change his behavior consciously. Now, this is something I found very insightful. If we start journaling, especially on the days that we have a quarrel with someone and what led to it or how we responded to it, we might be able to trace a pattern in our behavior, and over time we can try to consciously correct it. Another practice that can significantly help us is regular study of theosophical literature. There is a Japanese concept called Kaizen, which means continuous improvement. It is a belief that there is always room for learning. You may be a great scholar or an exponent in your field, but even then, there is always something new that you can learn. Learning doesn't just enhance your knowledge, it also keeps you grounded as it shows you how small you are in the larger scheme of things. Through regular study, we read about the words and teachings of the masters, and once we read them, we must consciously try to abide by them. For as Alcyone writes, and I quote, "So, to hear the master's words is not enough. You must do what he says, attending to every word, taking every hint. If a hint is not taken, if a word is missed, it is lost forever, for he does not speak twice." Unquote. Fourth on the list is how we should be mindful and watch our thoughts. In the At the Feet of the Master, Alcyone writes, and I quote, "When you become a pupil of the Master, you may always try the truth of your thought by laying it beside his. For the pupil is one with his Master, and he needs only to put back his thought into the Master's thought to see at once whether it agrees. If it does not, it is wrong, and he changes it instantly, for the Master's thought is perfect, because he knows all." Unquote. This is something we can all practice on a daily basis. Whenever a certain thought arises in our mind, let's pause before we put it into words or actions. Let's ask ourselves what the Master would think about it and what he would say or do under these circumstances. For we must never say, do or think what we cannot imagine the Master saying, doing or thinking. Lastly, we must remind ourselves about the impermanence of everything in this world. Nothing lasts forever. Whatever we see around us is transient. It is therefore important for us to remember that having pride about anything is our foolishness. Our job, our wealth, our social status, our knowledge, our beauty, everything can disappear in an instant. It is only wise then for us to remember to discriminate between the real and the unreal and learn to be humble always. On this note, I would like to conclude with a few lines from a song by Sant Kabir. मत कर माया को अहंकार, मत कर काया को अभिमान, काया गार से काची। ओ काया गार से काची हो जैसे ओसरा मोती, झोंका पवन का लग जाए, झपका पवन का लग जाए, काया धूल हो जासी। To explain these lines, mat kar maya ko ahankar, which means don't be deluded by maya or illusion. Mat kar kaya ko abhiman, which means don't take pride in the body. Kaya gar se kachi, this body is as fragile as clay. Ho jaise osra moti, it is like a drop of dew. झोंका पवन का लग जाए, झपका पवन का लग जाए, a blast of wind, just a little gust, काया धूल हो जासी, and the body will turn to dust. Thank you.